Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. In today's session, we'll start off with a presentation on why two-thirds of AI projects never reach production, followed by a fireside chat with audience Q&A. So, for our audience who are listening in, you can add your questions at any time from the Q&A tab on this platform, and we'll try to get to as many of these as possible during the discussion. The session will be recorded, and you can rewatch afterwards. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a bit more about what we do. CTO Craft provides a learning and mentoring community for senior technology leaders with a community of thousands of leaders, annual conferences, mentoring groups, and one-to-one coaching, as well as exclusive courses and workshops through the Canvas platform. Community membership is free, so if you're leading technology teams, you should definitely get involved if you aren't already. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mike Mead, CPTO at the Scale Factory. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Hannah. And thanks everybody for dialing into today's session. So let's start with a quick agenda. So we're going to start with some introductions today. I've got some great people for a panel and fireside chat that we have later on. So we'll go around and introduce ourselves in a second. But to give you an idea of what we're going to cover today, we commissioned a survey with CTO Craft, so we worked in partnership with them, and I'm going to take you through a bit of the background about the people that we surveyed, and then take you through some of the key highlights that we uncovered, and then we'll move into the fireside chat where we will have an open conversation between the panelists today on those results, and dig into some of those insights and ask some questions about why we think the results have panned out the way that they have, and then we'll open up for the forum for any questions from the audience. So if you've got any questions about the survey itself, or on anything from the discussion kind of sparks a thought or question, pop that into the chat or into the Q&A, and we'll cover those off. So let's start with some introductions. So I'm Mike Mead, and I'm Chief Product and Technology Officer at the Scale Factory. And with me today, I have Michelle and Ash. I'll let them introduce themselves. So over to you, Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle McDade. I'm founder of The Leading Place, and I work with organizations to help them to build high trust workplaces where people and performance thrive.
Thanks, Michelle. And Ash.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, I'm Ash, CTO and co-founder at 1010.
Thanks all. So before we go into the fireside chat, let's have a look at the survey. So if you haven't read the survey yet, at the bottom section of the screen there is a QR code. Give that a scan, and you can download a copy of the survey results. There's a bit of a commentary in the white paper there, so do take a look at that. I'll put the QR code up towards the end of the session if you miss it. But to give you an idea of who we surveyed and what we talked about, the survey that we conducted in partnership with CTO Craft was about the barriers in getting AI POCs into production. And the questions within that survey were all framed around things like, what people were doing, what barriers they saw in getting the POCs into production, what the success rate was, and so on. So I'll take you through the insights in a second. But as you can see here, like the majority of people that responded to the survey, over 60% were CTOs, and then the rest of the survey respondents are technology leaders in one form or another. In terms of size of company, as you can see, quite a wide range, but almost 50% sort of like 100 employees plus, with about 20% of organizations at the larger end of the scale, and then also some smaller companies as well. So a really diverse set of results that we got back. And in terms of industry, again, quite a wide-ranging section here. Unfortunately, like most people selected other, as I think a lot of people do, but you can see from the breakdown, results from quite a lot of industries there. So that's the sort of background of the survey and the demographics. Now, let's take a look at 3 highlights before we go into the fireside chat, just to set the scene and some context here. So the first result, and I think the most interesting one, is this one. How often do POCs make it past experimentation and get to production? So you can see here that the results are quite compelling, quite interesting. I think we're looking at something like a less than 50% success rate of POCs moving into production. So I think 2/3 of organizations responded saying that they have a less than 50% success rate of that. Or maybe they do get into production, but they're not really getting the business impact that they expected. So a fairly high failure rate we're seeing here, or at least POCs getting stuck and maybe not quite failing, but not making their way to production. At the bottom of the graph there, nearly always, so I guess we could call this group the successful group here, that's 12%. So only 12% of people that responded to the survey responded saying that they had consistent success in moving their POCs into production. And I guess for me, this really shows a lot of organizations are trying to build and innovate in this space, and it's quite scarce, the number of AI POCs that are making it into production. So if we have a look at the next couple of, there's 2 more stats here, which I think are quite interesting. So the next one we have is, let's move to the next slide. So leading on from success of POCs in production, this statement we posed to our respondents here was most of our AI prototypes are developed without production readiness in mind from day one. So you can see from the results here, it's quite interesting. I mean, long story short, most 37% of organizations are building AI POCs without thinking about any sort of production readiness when they self, with 30% thinking about what it might take to put the POC into production, and then everyone else somewhere in the middle. So sort of quite split here. Most of the people sort of sat in the middle with maybe they've thought a little bit about production, with sort of a split either side. About 30 and 37% thought about what it might take to put in production and haven't. And then let's take a look at the third stat. Now there's more in the survey. We don't have time to go through all of them today, but we will touch on some as we go through the fireside chat. But this is the last one that's interesting, I think. So when architecting AI for scale on the cloud, which of the following represents the most significant technical barriers in getting a POC into production? So we asked, there were lots of potential results that people could select from. And as you can see from the breakdown here, the one that sits at the top of the list at 26% is security, privacy, and compliance, being the sort of major barrier that the respondents were seeing in getting their AI projects into production. The next one on the list at 21% is around data management, data governance, and quality for AI workloads. And then the third one at 17% was once the AI model or AI system had been built, the complexity in then integrating those back into the business and the systems that exist. So I think 3 really interesting insights in the results here. We'll dig into these and a few more in the next section in the fireside. So for this section, I'm going to hand over to Michelle, who is going to lead the conversation, and you'll hear from Ash and I as well. Over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Mike. Really interesting research, and interesting because you hear a lot of people talking about how they're using AI, but actually the reality is a lot of it isn't getting to production. So you found that two-thirds of organizations admit to having less than a 50% success rate in moving AI POCs to production. Did this surprise you?
So no, it's a short answer. It wasn't surprising. It confirmed what we've been seeing out there in the wild. A lot of organizations approach us to help, get their POCs unstuck. And so we did have this gut feeling that there was some barriers and some complexity in making that happen. So the fact that the majority was struggling in this space wasn't a surprise. I think what was interesting for us was to get some like hard numbers on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, really interesting. And over a third of respondents admit they develop AI prototypes without any production readiness in mind. So I guess the question is, how do you convince teams to think about production from day one when the pressure is to ship the AI related product as soon as possible? And can you also just think about experimental mindset is encouraged in tech. So how do you get that balance right?
I guess there's a balance to be struck there, isn't there, between you don't want to kill the experimentation and make it clear to people that the only way that you can deploy anything is if it's 100% finished and completely production ready. But at the same time, that chasm between an experiment and the thing actually being ready for production needs to be explored, and everybody kind of needs to be aware of that. I think there's an opportunity here to kind of define, done. So organizationally, so including deployment, monitoring, security reviews, and the business value measurement, sort of everything else that needs to be in place there. But only, I think, after the point when you've launched that initial experiment and sort of shown that it can, to some extent, or it may be possible. But also early on, bring in some of those production-like constraints as early as possible. So use it with production-like data, deploy it to production-like environments, have the integrations in place that look like they do in production, and involve security and compliance teams from day one. You don't want to have something ready and then it gets flagged by security and compliance. There's no way this can go live in the state it's in, and you end up having to redesign. I think to some extent, this isn't a new problem. Over the sort of decades, we've found ourselves in a state with software development where we're able to define what done is and what that looks like. And we've learned the lesson over the years. It's not just when a developer says, yeah, that's pretty much good to go. There's a lot of other things that need to be in place. And I think to some extent, focusing on your point, that sort of let's build this quickly and let's really demonstrate that value. I think we've maybe lost sight of that a little bit. We need to bring a bit of that back.
Yeah, it's kind of nearly back to basics of understanding what done looks like and that everybody has the same understanding. And what have you seen like that has worked? How do you actually make sure that you still keep that ability to experiment and have that experimental mindset? Mike, do you have any examples of how that's worked?
So I think it's like building on what Ash said, it's striking a balance, right? I think we're in a place where we're all scrambling, right? There's this rush, there's this new technology, and there's a moving target, right? It's changing all of the time. Every week there's an announcement of a new tool, a new model, a new thing to look at, and so I think we're moving at a pace, right? And when we think about things like software development, we know that by I know we call in agile software development we call things a sprint, but when you break down a project, it's sort of looking at it as more of a sort of marathon, right? And running at a pace that's sustainable, and putting some checks and balances in place and checkpoints throughout. So having that cycle where we can monitor what's happening. So like, for example, what we do internally is we have a forum where people can propose ideas and they can have sponsorship, and we can do little experiments. So we can invest a limited amount of resource into something, into an initiative, and we can demonstrate back to the business, okay, we think this is where the risks are, we think this is where the benefits are. Look, we've demonstrated some value, and then we can continue to get investment and have that feedback loop. And I think for me, those feedback loops are key. So if we treat it as an experiment, that's fine. But what outcome do we expect, and when are we going to report back on that? And what does success look like? So when we finish that experiment, what are we expecting to see? And if we see it, is the business going to continue to invest in it, and where does that go? And if the experiment doesn't pan out, that's fine. I think in any failure, you can treat any failure like a success, right? We learn from it. So what is the next experiment that we're moving on to?
Yeah, and it sounds like having that clarity and having some of those conversations up front, so everybody knows what is the expectation.
Yeah, exactly. Expectation setting is key.
Yeah. And interestingly, the research shows that security, so 26%, data management 21%, and integration 17% are the top technical bottlenecks. So if you could fix just one of those across the industry, what would have the biggest impact?
So security is something that I take seriously, and so it should be the top of the list, right? It's important. But I see a connection here between the security barriers and the data management. I think if we look at it through another lens, we're talking about the security and privacy and governance of data, and so there is a connection there. So I think if I could pick one of those that I would fix, I think it would be data management. And I think that my rationale for that is it unlocks far more than just enabling AI projects, right? I think a lot of us recognize in our organizations, we're not, exempt from this, right? We'd love to have data better organized, higher quality, more consistency, and an understanding of what's where and what may contain sensitive information, what may contain PII and what not. So actually coming up with a data management strategy, building a catalog around it, is going to help enable those AI projects and unlock them, but is also going to give better benefits to the business anyway, like better business intelligence and reporting and so on. So I think for me, if I could solve one thing, I'd probably gravitate towards that more than the others.
It's interesting. It feels like deja vu. This is not a new issue, is it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The difference here is organizations now putting funding into this, right? So you can take some of that budget for AI projects and actually, get your data house in order.
Brilliant. Yeah. So misaligned stakeholder expectations is one of the single non-technical barriers that was identified. So can you talk about what's happening in the moment when, a data science team demos a 90% accurate model? And the leadership then asks, how can we deploy this? And what happens? How does this go wrong?
Good question. And I think that model accuracy is one thing, but the fact that what that data science team has demonstrated is a functionally working product to some extent. The senior stakeholders who might not be technical have seen this doing the thing that it was built to do. And just a little story here. I remember early on in my career working for, it was an interdealer broker, and we designed a new front office trading system app. And this thing was to test how the trading would work. So everything was completely fake behind it. It was a fake market data feed, fake matching, fake order matching, fake trade. The whole thing was just there to show how it worked at the front end, and that was demoed to a large number of very senior stakeholders who looked at that and thought, well, this is great. This is a great job. This is exactly what we want. So let's go live with it. And we're kind of no. There is nothing behind. It's a facade. There is nothing behind that. It's months away in terms of integration, in terms of engineering, in terms of testing, in terms of getting out the door. But they just didn't see that mindset. Well, they didn't see that difference because you showed them something. Seeing is believing, and you showed them something working. It comes back to that iceberg thing. They're seeing the 10% above the water and not the 90% beneath it. And I think that again comes back to defining what done is and getting that sort of that consensus that all this needs to be in place before it goes live. I think when I sort of explain this to people, analogy I come up with is, is pizzas. So I make pizzas at home, make the dough, cook them in my little pizza oven. People tell me they like them. They might be saying that to not hurt my feelings, but I can make half a dozen at a time. And that's making pizza, and people enjoy that pizza. Doesn't mean to say I can open a pizza restaurant with those skills, and it certainly doesn't mean to say I can build a business that will, sort of go toe to toe with Domino's. So although the end result looks and feels the same, it's a very, very different set of skills and an entirely different business. And I think that gets lost along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that many times where a POC has been demoed and then suddenly people think, oh, we're ready, it's here. And I guess just tied to that, change programs often fail because of people rather than technology. So, how do we, like the audience here is CTOs, how do tech leaders, meet people where they are, bring them along on the journey? What advice would you have here?
Well, just in terms of developing this, when we develop agentic AI solutions for customers, we actually mandate having BAs or people with similar skill sets to that alongside the engineers that are actually building it to be able to elicit those requirements of what the automations actually need to do to be able to understand the impact on people. And sometimes that comes down to optimizing those workflows before you automate them. But far often, it's far more around having somebody who has the soft skills to be able to engage with those teams, to be able to take people on that journey and to be able to assure them, to some extent, of what is coming down the line. That's even more important, because if you don't have that in place, then you'll find quite quickly that teams will sort of shut down to that, and that you won't get the results that you need. Essentially, is to some extent it's very technical, but on the other hand, it's awfully driven by people, especially when a lot of these workflows and the things that you find yourself automating, they won't be documented properly, and if they are documented properly, that documentation is probably way out of date, and the people that are doing it day out, they'll have all kinds of clever workarounds that they do to actually get the thing done, and you can bet your life those aren't documented in the workflows that are there. So understanding that is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, leaders may have been talking about something they may have more insights. They might have insights that haven't been shared. So, if there's gaps and there's lack of transparency, people will they'll fill the vacuum with their own ideas. So bringing them and having those conversations, I think is vital.
The people on the ground doing it are the people that really know how this works, and they've often got the best ideas of how it can be improved, for sure.
Yeah, and that's a problem we see always in tech, where those people aren't listened to. Yeah. So, Mike, 59% of the organizations struggle with data science, engineering, business collaboration, and the majority of those are stuck in early stage ML ops. So, what are 2 or 3 capabilities that separate those that are consistently shipping AI to production from the others, I guess?
So it's something that Ash touched on earlier when talking about software development, and I think one of the things that I see is that it's not that we've forgotten how to do this. It's taking things that we have learned elsewhere and applying them to this emerging area. So for me, I think it mirrors the problem that we saw years ago with the developer and operations gulf, right? And then we had the DevOps movement, and there's this kind of cultural change in organizations and clear ownership, automation, clear metrics, and that really transformed the way that we built software and shipped it to production and collaborated and worked with as a team. And we need the same for AI. And I think what I see is organizations that take that thinking from software development and apply that to what they're doing in this space and to MLOps. I mean, some organizations haven't even thought about MLOps, right? They just have, somebody produces a big export of data that sits in a huge CSV or Excel, and then that's handed over, and then people are building systems on top of that, and it's all really, really clunky. So I think, successful teams I've seen have a real collaboration between all those groups and a shared understanding. So having data scientists who are thinking about production constraints, with models that they're building or systems that, workflows that they're designing, what are the constraints in getting those in production, and can those be overcome? Like, what are hard constraints, and what are constraints that the organization need to work around or bridge, and then having shared tooling and platforms that are consistent, and consistency between those, and involving business stakeholders early. So you're thinking about, what outcome are we trying to achieve? What does success look like? What are we measuring? What are the key metrics? And then how are we going to build a system and get that into production? And what all of those constraints, like what are the security requirements? Where does the data sit? What does the systems look like? And all of that. And I think as soon as you pull all of that together, those teams are way more successful. And a lot of it is the thinking that we've done elsewhere in software development. It's just porting it across.
Yeah. And how do you get all those different groups to collaborate better?
So there are different ways of doing it. The same with like DevOps, right? You find organizations have sort of different shapes and whatnot, but there is a pattern there. It's collaboration, it's building a cross-functional team. So if you are going to kick off an AI initiative, who are those stakeholders that you need in the room? So if we think about, in the world of cloud, you've got like a cloud center of excellence, and you've got somebody in that representing finance. You've got somebody thinking about infosec. You've got somebody thinking about production. You've got somebody thinking about software development, somebody from product. It's like pulling all these people together and getting them in the room and saying, okay, let's define what this looks like and what success looks like. What are our financial goals? What are our infosec requirements? How is this going to integrate within the product? So a lot of POCs are built on the side, great. And, as we saw, what was it? I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, like 17% struggle to then integrate that back into the business. So thinking about all of these things early on, then kicking off the project, and then at least everybody's on the same page.
And it's less costly, and less
Yes.
rework as well. Yeah. Just to say, if anybody has questions, feel free to stick them into the Q&A as well. Any, the more difficult, the better, right, Ash and Mike?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So just looking at the results show that leaders are rejecting traditional technical metrics as primary indicators of value. So the report states that 75% accurate model delivered reliably is infinitely more valuable than a 95% accurate model stuck in a sandbox. And like, I'm always thinking about done is better than perfect. Unreleased software is no value. But how do you measure that delivered reliability, and what KPIs would capture this?
Yeah, I guess you've got the sort of traditional metrics that you capture for any sort of service or software. So uptime, availability, response time, latency, error rates. At some level, is the service available, the system, and actually running when the users need it. One key difference, though, I think, is that in traditional software, everything's kind of deterministic. The code path through it will always do the same thing, and after you've released it, that was always a sacred cow, that it will continue to work in the same way. These things are non-deterministic, so they're based on probabilities as the answer. They can give different answers, and in some cases these things can drift over time as well, so they can learn. So the model, the weights, they can actually change as well. So over time, you need to make sure you're monitoring production to make sure it's accurate against the training baselines that you had in place in the first place. You want to have the monitoring in place so you can actually detect that and jump on it as soon as you see it start to happen. So I think those things are broadly in line from that kind of technical point of view. But then in terms of the business metrics, really that comes down to at some level, I guess, the pound, shilling, and pence. The what are the kind of the FTE hours saved, sort of profit margin improvement. The kind of things that a CFO would focus on, really, and often the things that boards focus on in terms of how these translate that technical work into the sort of P&L language that they understand. But Mike touched a little bit on ML ops there. I think that's really important. You need to have monitoring and testing and everything else in place so that you recognize at some level what you're really doing here is still system engineering, but with LLMs. And the LLM is almost a commodity. There are sort of systems in place. We would say this, we're an AWS sort of partner, but Bedrock, for example, on AWS, we are able to swap that model in and out from numerous different vendors at numerous different levels, because new models come along all the time, and so you want to know how much that's costing you, and you want to know if a cheaper, more able model comes along, that you can swap that out without that actually impacting the underlying service, and to be able to do that continuously.
Yeah. I guess what I'm thinking, when you were talking about the monetary metrics and if time saved or hours saved or whatever, or people, and there's a lot of talk about, AI is going to help you to do more interesting work and free you up from drudgery, and some of the time that isn't what we're seeing, but some of the time it is. But how can we also look at how we are delivering increased capability and not just hours and time saved? Is there anything we can, around looking at it through a different lens from a value delivery perspective?
I think there's almost two sides to it, isn't there? You've got if you can have something incredibly simple, but that lots of people are doing it very often, then there's an ROI there on something that's very simple. And it's an argument to say, if you're going in and looking at where you're going to implement AI, do that first. That's low-hanging fruit. That will demonstrate value. That will demonstrate that this is effective in terms of everything else around it. But then you can also gauge complexity of these workflows and systems as you're doing it, to be able to sort of put a handle on that and say, well, yes, this is doing something that was very straightforward. This is now doing something which is far more complicated. A workflow that runs for minutes or even hours, that collaborates across different systems and different departments. I think it's important to kind of understand that complexity. Now, how on earth you tie that back to the financials becomes even harder, because as soon as you start bringing in extra teams that this thing is touching on, calculating all that it becomes way more complicated, far more complicated than I'm normally involved in anything to do with the financials, and there's probably cross-charging and goodness knows what else involved in calculating that. But a friend of mine who works very much in this technical space, he said to me, when they're selling AI solutions, they never sell the tech. He said that you're always selling to a CFO at some level, and so that's their focus, for better or worse. That's sort of where it lies.
Yeah, you just have to be able to articulate the value, and in a language that they understand as well. So in the survey, it showed that 40% are investing in upskilling staff, but without the internal maturity to learn from. How effective is that?
I think unfortunately, we kind of are where we are. These things have not been around very long. And I sometimes cast my mind back to those sort of memes that you used to get talking about, the DevOps world, where it'd be a case of recruiters will be looking for a senior person with 10 years experience in a tool that had only existed for 2 years. So there is definitely an element of that. And I think as long as, and at the same time, a lot of this is new, but fundamentally, if you're training people, a lot of the fundamentals in what they need to know in terms of, to Mike's point earlier, the data processing, the cloud engineering, all those things need to be in place as well. And I think if you can actually train people and make that practical, so if in a business, every business has the kind of workflows that agentic AI will be looking to automate. You don't even need to be in a business. So you put people's own personal sort of things that they do with productivity systems. There is plenty of opportunity to be able to do that. And I think it's really about teaching them enough theory, but at the same time really grounding that in the practice, so they are able to do it. I mean, the way in which we do it specifically is when we put a team in place, we tend to have seniors and leads that they can learn from, actually at the point that it's deployed. And then over time, the involvement of those leads diminishes. And so it's the juniors that are then able to pick up the slack and do that. Because, I mean, there's, on the one hand, you read about how recruitment's really down in terms of, junior individuals sort of entering the industry. But at the same time, if you have a scenario where there isn't a huge volume of senior expertise, that's a huge opportunity for people as well to be able to demonstrate that they can do it and they can shine. I don't think it's one and done either with upskilling. One thing I would say is that this changes so often and so quickly that skills that you learn now, by the time we get to Easter, there may well be other things coming down the line that you need to know as well. So I would say that to succeed in this industry, that is the number one, that continuous learning mindset. that you have to be prepared to do that. And I think sometimes when we talk about upskilling, it's a case of you're here and we're going to take you to there through some sort of upskilling program and then you're done. Definitely not the case.
Yeah, and I see a number of questions coming in here, and one of them is kind of related to what you've just said. So, Reese Jones has asked, have you seen any interesting cross-skill roles emerging that hint at the future of hiring?
Oh, interesting. I mean, so we take a lot of individuals into the business and we upskill them in technical skills. Now, what's interesting there is that a lot of individuals, when they join us, they're quite daunted by that, the fact that they don't necessarily have these technical skills, but they often also don't realize what they do have. So they have a lot of experience of managing people, managing transformations, managing workflows, managing change. Those skills of being able to collaborate, of being able to influence, of being able to get on with a wide variety of different people and communicate with them at the right time, they're becoming more important than ever, I would say, particularly in that sort of agentic AI space where it's a combination. It's almost what we saw with kind of that low code, no code dev sort of shift a few years ago, where it went from, well, you're a developer and you're a business analyst, to now, well, in the world of low code dev, you've got to wear all the hats. You need to be, one day you're a BA, the next day you're a dev, the next day you're a tester, the next day you're a deployment engineer. And I think we're seeing more of that. So there's multifaceted skills that people have. In terms of the actual tech skills, the point I made earlier, there's an awful lot of those skills which are a baseline that people need, cloud, data, but maybe not in some areas, maths for sure. In some areas, machine learning, I think you do need some fundamental basics in maths, probability stats, linear algebra for sure, maybe some calculus. But for the most part, you don't really need that. This is kind of automation, using models and tools that exist rather than necessarily building your own.
Yeah,
I don't answer that if it didn't just ping another message.
No,
there.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think that, looking at that cross-functional team and saying, does the team have all the skills needed within it to take something from idea to production is key. So like, I mean, as what you said there, Ash, like having just a blend of skills within that team. And as an individual, like being expected to do a bit of quality assurance and do a bit of platform engine and write a bit of code, and so on. But I think, like more specifically, like, so MLOps, a term coined 10 years ago, an MLOps engineer has been a role that's been out there. People have been advertising for it and hiring for it in the last few years. So it's not new, but I think what we're seeing is a big uptick in organizations hiring MLOps engineers, where that is their blend between having a bit of a data science understanding, and being able to write a bit of code and work in a production cloud environment. So sort of I kind of see it as a bit similar to a DevOps engineer role, right? Somebody that can, turn their hand to a few different disciplines, but more broadly to what Ash said, like having a multidiscipline team with all the skills within it.
Yeah, and like an obvious one, obviously, is critical thinking. And I also did a talk for CTO Craft a while back where we did the deep dives on emotional intelligence, and mine was EI in the age of AI. And I think, again, when you think back, it's people that make things happen that will bring this to life, and we need to make sure that we keep we think about emotional intelligence as well, and how we interact and keep the human in the loop, I guess.
Completely. I think that's such a key point for ML and AI, because these things are already trained on data that's frankly easy to come by. It's images, it's text, it's everything else. And when you think that it's 80% or 90% of communication is sort of unspoken and that kind of thing, that isn't captured. So expecting a machine to learn or have any awareness of that, when it's really hard to get that across, and it's really hard to capture that, is going to be pretty well impossible. Well, not impossible. I think it's impossible, but certainly some way off. It feels like that's not a focus, I don't think, at the moment.
Yeah, and having that critical thinking to actually understand where there's bias, where there's cohorts not even represented in the data is vital as well. I see a question here from Paul Luno. After so many failing projects, do you see any AI fatigue in teams that may stop them from continuing experimenting and learning? And how do you come across and how to come across it?
I would say I don't see it as much in the teams actually doing it, the fatigue, as much as the senior management who are sort of looking at that ROI case we spoke about earlier and kind of thinking, well, we've invested in this. What return are we getting from it? What I see anyway is that the people that are doing it are really wanting to do it and wanting to continue, and there's a real appetite to keep doing that. But then equally, if these things aren't going into production and they're getting it from senior management in the neck every day about, well, when is this stuff actually getting over the line? Fatigue will be introduced, but there's certainly enthusiasm there that I see.
Yeah, and actually kind of related. Oh, do you want to say something on that, Mike?
Well, I have come across some engineers who are like, oh gosh, not another AI thing. So I think there is sort of overload with things changing all the time. I think it depends what aspect you look at, right? I think there are a lot of engineers who are adopting AI tooling to like help write code and write tests and sort of augment what they're doing. And there's a lot of success in that area. I think people building systems and putting those in production, like actually building AI systems opposed to consuming it, it depends on the organization and how successful they are. I think I'm not sure we've quite reached the point of that yet. Maybe we're starting to in a year's time. Let's circle back and see what people think.
Interesting. And actually, there's a related question here from Ricardo Joao. What's the cultural impact on your teams of introducing AI? Who's using it more and best? There's a number of questions here. Any resistance from senior developers? I guess you were alluding to that a little bit, or you may be the opposite. How do you manage the transition from no AI to AI supported vibe development?
I can answer that one. About a month ago, I surveyed our cloud engineering team to see how many of them were using AI tooling to do things like support on cloud migration projects and like Terraform, like CloudFormation, and so on. And 85% of the team responded that they were using AI tooling, with 15% saying that they weren't really using it. So I think there are some people in our organization even who are like, they're just happy working the way that they are. They don't see the value that it's bringing yet. But one thing I will say is that has sort of happened without a mandate or a sort of a big company initiative to not force people, but strongly encourage people to adopt the tooling. That has happened largely organically, which is surprising. So I don't know if we've covered all of the questions there with that. That's some insights from our own team.
Yeah, and I think also it's worth remembering when we use the word mandate, one of our core needs is autonomy and agency, and that's why I kind of mentioned, bringing people along and listening to them. You've got a higher chance of adoption if you can build that trust with them rather than just saying, you need to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And something that's come up in conversation a lot, and I see another question in the chat, so I'm gonna end up half answering it. But
let us know which question it is.
So it's about security, actually. Security being bottleneck.
How do you ensure that security and architecture policies are keeping up with innovation to ensure safe pipelines?
Yeah, so I think I can sort of segue into that. So I think the key thing here is like we have given people a handful of tools that they can choose from. So they've got autonomy. Like we're ISO 271 certified. We've extended that with a responsible kind of AI usage policy on how we use AI tooling internally, because we might be working with like customer systems and customer data, what we can and can't do. So the first thing that we did was we laid that down as very, very early on. Actually, I mean that's been in place for I don't know, 18 months, something like that, to set a baseline. And then, we took through vendor assessments, a few tools, and then, the team have some options. So there's not just one tool we're saying that they can use. There's a handful that they can pick and choose from. And I think the key thing here really is giving people that choice and autonomy, like you said there, Michelle, but not getting in the way. So it would have been quite easy for us to say, oh, ISO certified, we take information security very serious. We're going to pause for 6 months. Nobody is going to do any AI stuff. And the net result of that, we all know what happened. Shadow IT. people will be using ChatGPT on the side, and they will be copy pasting data that they shouldn't into a system that isn't vetted, and it'll be the Wild West. So what we did was we tried to get ahead of that by laying down some framework and enabling people to use some things in a safe way. And initially maybe that wasn't fully thought out or ideal, but it was something to get started, so we weren't blocking people. And then from then on, we've continued to sort of build on that. I mean, there are a few resources that I'd recommend you have a look at for this. I'll rattle them off, but I'll pop them in the chat in a sec. OWASP now have extended their top 10, so they've got like an agentic AI and a Gen AI OWASP. So go have a look at that and incorporate that in your training. So get people to go through that so they can identify potential risks there. We use a lot of AWS. AWS have their well-architected framework. They've got lenses for Gen AI, responsible AI, and so on. These are all great reference things to just incorporate in what you're doing and say, do some stuff with AI, but make sure that you follow, X, Y, Z and use that as a reference.
And I think as well, if you're prototyping something, you don't necessarily start from scratch. So Mike, you've done a lot of work in the past of sort of developing products that sort of allow people to, so it's a very simple thing, it's like the sort of hello world app, if you like, but done properly with the security well architected and everything else in place. So use that as your starting point rather than having to build things in afterwards. So it doesn't slow you down in that case, but then you're far less likely to hit that roadblock further down the line.
Brilliant. I just want to, you shared, Mike, at the start about the different sizes of companies. So there's a question here about smaller companies. Any advice for smaller companies? Often we don't have the numbers to compound savings to recover costs, so ROI is so difficult. Many ideas for improvement get left behind because we just can't make the ROI numbers work.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on what you're looking at exactly. If you're looking at adopting AI tooling, look at the various like software as a service things out there. So if you're a small organization and let's say, I don't know, you're a law firm, right? There are lots and lots of tools and products emerging now that are AI powered, tailored for your industry that you can just use off the shelf and adopt that internally. So you don't have to do a lot of the, I mean, obviously vet them and make sure that they're a proper company and they're treating, they're handling your data safely. But a quick win is to adopt something else somebody else has built. If you're building stuff yourself, I think we're seeing a lot of frameworks and platforms emerge. So let's take agentic AI, for example, let's say use AWS. Amazon Bedrock is emerging as a really good platform for building AI applications on. For agentic stuff, Amazon's got their Agent Core, they've got Strand, and so there's all these frameworks. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can start to use some things off the shelf and things that give you that springboard to close the gap there.
And I think you can build some things without spending a huge amount of engineering effort to deliver big value as well. I mean, so that point you just made there, Mike, using some very simple Bedrock agent and AWS knowledge base, you can build sort of a RAG database with a whole set of documentation in it. I mean, we did this. I'm sure many other organizations on this call as well. You need to respond to RFPs, that kind of thing. Frustrating as hell. You've written it a million times before, but the question's always written slightly differently. A simple agent with all the RFPs you've generated before, for example, is very quick to set up, but can also add some real value. I mean, obviously, you don't just let it out the door. Validate it and check it. Maybe use another LLM to do that. But it gets you some way up that quite quickly. And I think there's something in the human aspect of this, that if you are automating something which is really straightforward, but also people find really hard and really nasty and they'd rather not do, I think they're far more likely to embrace that. To your point earlier, Michelle, around, don't start off doing something to automate the stuff that they like doing. You will find a lot more resistance there.
Yeah, there's a really interesting question here from Janice Hortz. The research points to the cognitive disengagement working with Gen AI. The risk of sloppiness increases. The humans are way less confident than Gen AI. Is this something that resonates?
Resonates with my own experience, frankly. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've just kind of stopped throwing some things just to AI, because because that's almost my default position now. And I'm thinking, no, I need to retain some of this. And I think there's a lot of, I'm sure there will be a lot of research going into that, but that does worry me. I was a little nervous when one of the big providers went down, and suddenly you just went there, and I got the fear, when you enter the URL there and it's no longer there, you think, oh my God, what do I do now at this point? It's I think
do this on my own.
yeah, and I think that's going to become more of an issue. I think as people do just stop thinking to some extent. That what you mentioned there around critical thinking.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's like the advice is to think it out first and then validate, check, have you forgotten something, rather than starting with a query with ChatGPT or whatever. So there's another question here. Are we seeing, it's from Julian Tedstone, are we seeing widespread AI-driven vibe coding having a role in pilots? How do we feel about that? Any indications on whether these approaches help or hinder success rates?
Well, I'll speak from my own experience, and there's probably some of my team dialed in and thinking, Mike, you're guilty of that. So, it's sometimes, I'm this year, I've had, there's been one or two things that I've needed to kind of set out and achieve, and so I have, thrown some prompt at Claude and produced a rough Python script to achieve something, and then hand that over to the team to say, like, this is the kind of thing that I'm looking to achieve. And so rather than sort of sketch out an idea, I can actually give them some really rough prototype to sort of demonstrate what I'm trying to achieve. So it's changed my behavior. One thing I need to do is to be a bit smarter with my prompts, because I've realized, I've discovered, I don't know if anyone's done this with vibe coding, is if you don't really sort of put some not guardrails, but you control what the AI is doing, it'll write something way overcomplicated for what's needed. Something could be like 50 lines of Python, and instead you end up with a 500-line script that works, but it's just way over engineered. So it's something that I've been doing myself over the last year or two. But I've seen a lot of organizations. We work with a lot of startups, and historically they would work with a small agency, and they would try and find an organization to hack together something as quickly and cheaply as possible, to then go to investors and say, we've got something here, sort of what we're building, and they'll go for a seed round and they'll try and get some funding. I think now it's really lowered the barrier for a startup to put an idea together and have something that's kind of like a working prototype and put that in front of investors. I think the thing that we need to be conscious of is, like, you're probably going to have to throw that away and build it properly, and you're going to need real engineers to do it. So it'll only get you so far. But I think it's replaced that is what I'm seeing.
I mean, personally, that's what I see as well. Going from a place where I would be researching the sort of libraries I could get to achieve an outcome, to just telling an AI co-pilot now to just, you work out what libraries are best to use for this, and this is what I'm looking for, off you go and do it. I think it works brilliant from the ground up. There's a question of if that is being coded by the system. If you don't have the expertise and knowledge and exposure to it, how do you know what good looks like? Maybe more worryingly, how do you know there's nothing bad in there as well?
Yeah.
But I think that's a very different thing to working on a large established code base and getting it to make changes there. And from my own experience, actually going backwards can be a little bit tricky. You'll progress at a great rate of knots. You'll be doing really well, and then it will get something wrong, and you've got to make sure that's in version control, because if you ask it to take it back, it will really struggle, and it will end up doing probably something unfortunate. One thing I find with them is that in Claude Code, for example, you've got kind of planning mode there. So rather than it just going away and writing code, a bit like a junior dev might be keen to sort of go in, it will ask the questions. You can sort of to and fro with it in terms of exactly what you're looking at, and kind of refine that and get all that in place before you then hit the ground running with it. And I think there's a number of other things coming down the line, frameworks which are more grown up, quotes, if that's the thing, in terms of what they do. So Mike within AWS, there's their Copilot, which is very much sort of spec driven, isn't it, and ensures that you have sort of unit tests and everything else in place, and sort of integration tests before it goes out the door. So I think that's the next step. I think of vibe coding, sort of more grown-up coding. I guess at some level with all these things, they're almost like a really young, junior, enthusiastic member of the team. Great. Would you necessarily want that individual to just be putting stuff straight out the door without somebody checking it and without the balances in place first?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah, I think I'd agree there. Like large, complex, existing legacy systems are a real challenge. I was talking to an organization last week, and for their systems, they have contact packs. So for each application, they have a pack of information that they can feed an agent, and it can bring it up to speed with like what the system does, uptime requirements, that spec really. And so I quizzed them about what was in the context pack. And essentially, it's all of the things that we should have in the systems that we build and operate today that we know doesn't exist, right? We know if we go to a legacy system and we pull up, the knowledge base for it and the documentation, it is going to be out of date. There's going to be gaps. There's going to be some run books for the systems missing. And so I think, they managed to get to a really good place where they had good quality, these context packs where the documentation was all up to date and relevant. And maybe, AI using an agent can help keep it up to date. But I think, maybe this is just going to help us be a bit more grown up with things like documentation and so on for our code bases.
Which has also always been an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I see there's two more questions. I'm just conscious of time, and I want to make sure that I give you time if there's anything like you want to leave people with, any advice or any key things you want to highlight for people to walk away with. So I'll leave it up to you if you think you've time to answer one or both, or
So no. I think I can quickly answer Julian's question about data. So Julian asked, should we fix our messy data before rolling out AI, or use AI to fix the messy data? My advice here is, over the years, we've been collecting masses of data, right? We've been told data is valuable, data is valuable, so we've been collecting loads and loads of it. If you are looking at building a new system or agentic workflow, chances are you're not going to need no more than 10% of the data that you have. So I'd focus on that. So don't think about, we need to do the big data warehouse modernization project. Look at the data you need, focus on that, get that in order. Think of the use case and work backwards. I'll share, there's a white paper I put together on a tool, there's a spreadsheet you fill out, and then that'll help you hone in on what you need to do with the data. But I would recommend put a data strategy in place, whether you use AI or not to drive, tidying that up or not, it almost doesn't matter, but you don't need to do all of your data. It's probably about 10%, and use the use case to drive what that 10% is.
Okay. And do you want to answer Manish's question?
Yeah. So this one, I think we talked a lot about this. So this is MLOps, right? This is all of the platform stuff needed to put together a pipeline to get data to a place where you can train a model, where you can build a knowledge base and whatnot. My opinion, I think there's still a lot of maturity to be had in the tooling in that space, and there's probably some gaps here and there. And I think that will be solved over time. But I think it's taking the sort of, the DevOps thinking and applying that to the MLOps space. So, automated pipelines, having test environments. So many organizations have a data warehouse and they don't have a test version of it. So when they're looking at sort of, automating a pipeline and sort of testing it out, they've just got one production environment, and now they're building AI systems on top of it. So thinking about, test production environments, it's all the DevOps thinking, just sort of apply that to this world.
And if you have a test environment, making sure that the volume of data and the actual makeup of that data is representative of what you have in prod as well.
Yeah, exactly. Infrastructure as code. So like I see so many data scientists go in the AWS console and wire up these systems manually. Use Terraform, CloudFormation, whatever the tool of choice is, so it's automated and it can be repeated.
Yeah.
Right. We're just 1 minute to the end. There is another question. I'm not sure if you have time for that, or if you want to just leave people with some final thoughts that might be helpful.
So I think Ash, this Balaji calls out you specifically. Maybe we could quickly answer it.
Sorry, I'm just trying to see that one. Michelle, one of the reasons never reached production is the lack of clarity and focus on excluding the false positives in the results that they produce. Yeah, So in terms of the false positives, excluding the false positives, I'm struggling a little bit with that one, actually, if I'm being brutally honest. Is that something I said earlier?
Yeah, so I guess it's like the ROI of initiatives. Like, I guess it's having those metrics so you know what the return on investment is of those. So I guess you could have a successful application, but you don't get the ROI.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking false positives specifically in terms of results generated. Yeah, I think it's essential that you have that up front you define what it is that this thing actually needs to do. That up front you define what those business outcomes are, frankly, that this thing needs to hit. Otherwise, you've really just got a bit of a fun technical experiment. And you'll maybe get away with that a few times, but what we're seeing is that in the senior level, people are far more, they're wanting to see that ROI. That's all they look at. That's all they focus on.
Brilliant. Thank you. We got a lot in there, got a lot of questions answered. I know we're just at time, so Mike, I see you've shared the LinkedIn and contact details for everyone.
Yes. Yes. So thanks.
You want to leave people with, yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, Michelle, for facilitating and leading today's discussion. We had so many questions. I think we really struggled to get those in. So yeah, the survey results QR code up there. Download the survey. Here's the contact details of Michelle, Ash, and I. Do feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. If you do have any sort of follow-up questions, do feel free to reach out to us directly. If you recognise a lot of what is in the survey results and in the conversation today in your own organisation, reach out to me, drop me a message on LinkedIn or drop me an email, and we can have a chat about your use case and your position more specifically. But yeah, thanks for everybody for dialing in today.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm sure there'll be another one to come soon. And I know tickets are already on sale for CTO Craft London next March. So feel free to have a look at that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.